Our keynote speaker to close the program is Randy Blankenhorn, who served as the Illinois Transportation Secretary under Governor Bruce Rauner since 2015. He leads an agency of 10 offices that serve the needs of the state. He oversees $3 billion in operating budget, 4,800 employees, and $3.4 billion in capital projects. And it's all listed, I think, in your program. Prior to his being selected as the IDOT Secretary, he was the first appointed director of the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. He is a tireless public servant committed to improving the transportation system of the state, to access and to equity, and a longtime Urban Forum supporter. Randy?
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. Wow, this is a little loud. Thanks for having me. I hope the forum has been going well today. It's always an important event for our region, for our communities, to talk about the future of our urban communities and what they look like and what we need to do together to think about it. The focus today has been a lot on infrastructure, which is, I guess, why I'm here. But it's more than that. It's thinking about the future in new and different ways. I think you heard some of that before. I've been asked to talk about two things today. One is a little bit of what's going on in Washington. For those of us that watch it, we still aren't sure exactly what's happening, but I'll try to give you the overview as I know it. And then a little bit more about what we're thinking about when we talk about soft infrastructure versus hard infrastructure. When we talk about community development versus economic development, what are the things that we're trying to do as a department and honestly as a transportation industry? Starting at the federal side, a $1 trillion program might be a $1 trillion program depending on how you look at it. We're not waiting for this to happen. There's a lot of moving parts, but I do believe that this administration is interested in more funding, in more creative funding for infrastructure in general and transportation in specifics. The thing that has helped me through this the most is that they have really reached out to state and local officials to talk about what does this program need to look like? How does it work? Because the federal government doesn't implement these programs. State and local governments do. And honestly, this is the first time in my long career in the transportation world where I feel they have actually been interested in what we have to say. Past administrations have invited us to Washington or called us, and it felt like they were checking a box. Yes, we talked to the state officials. Yes, we talked to the regional officials. I didn't feel like it was a meaningful conversation. I believe in this case that state and local officials are going to drive what this program looks like. And I think that's a first. So from that perspective, I'm very happy. There are 4 tenets of this infrastructure proposal that they have out there. And when they first came out, in a lot of ways, we said at IDOT, we could have written these ourselves because they are the things that we believe in. We believe in targeted federal investment. There's only going to be so much more federal money, and that's just a fact of where it comes from. I am a firm believer in raising the gas tax at the federal level. I've talked to our congressional people about it for over a decade. Usually they tell me, Randy, we're right behind you. The problem is they need to be in front of me. They need to be pushing this, but there is no appetite today to do something like that. I believe an appetite will come, but it isn't today. And so we have to figure new and creative ways to do that. I think we have to think about what is the federal role in transportation. If they don't deliver, if you look at all transportation funding, it's about 30 cents of every dollar is federal. Where is the federal role? What is the federal responsibility? And how do we compare that to then what do we take on as state, local, and private industries? How do we think about this in a new way? That's an important thing for us to talk about. We have new flexible funding, competitive funding programs. The infra program, which I'll talk about a little later, really is an opportunity for them to focus. And we have said to them on and on and on again, we have a great project for that I'll mention, but you need to focus federal resources. Spreading those competitive grants across 50 states in a way that doesn't get anything major done is not an effective use of federal funds. If the best projects happen to be in Arizona or Massachusetts or California, fine. I don't like that, but fine. I think that's how you need to be thinking about a federal program, is really solving real federal problems, national problems. And honestly, when we are the transportation hub of North America, a lot of those transportation problems are here. So we think we can compete very well in that. The second principle that they have is what they're calling encouraging self-help. I would call it putting skin in the game. I think that we have to figure out how state and local governments, and particularly here in Illinois, how we are going to put more of our own funding into projects. It used to be federal funds would come and 80% of it would be federal and 20% of it would be local, and that's how you built things. Those days are over. Those days are gone. We need to find new creative ways to raise resources locally. Locally in the cities, locally in our regions, locally at the state level, to not only match federal funds, but to drive federal funding decisions. A lot of what we heard is that they would like to use new funding to be the last dollars in at the federal level, not the first dollars in. Close the gap. How do we use federal money to close the gaps that we have at our state and local levels? And I think that makes a lot of sense. But I also think it has to come with a new relationship between the federal government and our states and local governments. The third is to align investment with entities that actually can get something done. And the best example I can give isn't a highway or transit, it's actually in our waterways. We forget that waterways are a huge part of our transportation system. I hope you heard from our panel from Clayton that they need to be a bigger piece of our transportation system. But we have locks and dams that are owned and operated by the Corps of Engineers. They're not actually capable of delivering the kind of enhancements and rehabilitations that we need. How do we use the process that they've created and actually create entities that can get these things done? There's actually money sitting in places on our harbors that isn't being used because we can't get projects done. That's a shame. And so I think this idea of how do we talk about new entities that can deliver is a good way to think about a federal role. The last is, and I don't think this is unusual that any of you haven't heard it, and you probably heard it in the previous panels, is how do we leverage private investment? There is a role for private investment in our infrastructure systems. From our waterways to our water and sewer, to our parks, to transportation, there is a role here. But it is not the answer. And I think we have all made that clear for years that public-private partnerships are a tool. They are not a golden bullet that is going to solve all of our problems for us. There are opportunities that they make perfect sense, and I'll talk about a couple of those, but there are most of them that they don't. And so we still have to talk about federal, state, and local resources that do the day-to-day things that we need to do that I'm sure Leanne talked about. How do we maintain what we have? You're not going to privatize maintenance of a highway or a rail line. It's just not feasible at this point in time. There has to be regular funding sources that allow us to do what needs to be done. I also spent, while I was at CMAP, at least a year in Washington talking to our lawmakers and their staffs about the difference between funding and financing. They are two completely different things. And we think that if we provide capital and cash, if we provide capital opportunities, then we've solved our problems. We don't need new financing mechanisms in Illinois. We know how to borrow money in Illinois. We don't know how to pay it back, but we know how to borrow money in Illinois. We need solid revenue streams that we can count on year after year, maybe not for the big new stuff, but for our day-to-day maintenance of our existing system. And when we talk about additions to our system, we are truly talking about on the margins. Particularly here in Chicagoland, we have the system that we're going to have over the next 20 years. Might we add a lane here or there? Yes. Might we add a transit extension here or there? Yes. But these are going to be small percentages of the overall system. We have to work with our federal partners so that they understand there is not a financing problem, there is a revenue problem, and we've got to find a way to deal with that. So while P3s are just one tool, they are a valuable tool, and we have tried to find ways to make that work. We have a proposal to add a managed lane on I-55, that the existing lanes would stay free, that give people an opportunity to pay into a system that gets them downtown in a specific amount of time or back to the suburbs. There is no opposition to this. They're happening all over the world. This isn't a new idea. I talk to our people about being innovative all the time, And much of what we think is innovation is actually happening all over this country and all over this world, and we're just behind the times. Managed lanes is one of those. We need to try it here in Illinois. The Stevenson Expressway seems to be the right way to do it. Unfortunately, we have not had the cooperation of the General Assembly to let us move this forward, which is really a shame. We're going to continue to fight for it. We're going to continue to move it. But part of my interest in I-55 is we have to do something on the Eisenhower. I had a meeting today with the chairman of the tollway this morning. He was about 40 minutes late sitting on the Eisenhower. And I said, you should know better, man. This is what it is. But we've got to find a way not only to make it work better, and I think congestion pricing can come into play in that kind of a scenario, but we've got to find a way to rebuild it. And I think that there is an opportunity there through a public-private partnership to do that. But our feeling is we've got to try congestion pricing on the Stevenson before we attempt it on what is maybe the most congested highway in the United States, which is the Eisenhower. So there's a series of things that we have to go through. Another one that we've talked about a lot that I think people forget is truly a public-private partnership is CREATE. Our rail program that is a series of 70-plus projects that includes rail, not only freight rail, but passenger and Amtrak movement through this region, started as maybe the first big public-private partnership in America. It was a way for us to leverage freight industry money to solve common problems. And I think this is an example of how we need to think about where is that leverage that the federal government likes to talk about. How do we think about leveraging private money, not necessarily to pay for it all, but to be the piece that gets us going, that then we can find the public funding to make the rest of it work. I talked about the INFRA program, which is a competitive program that the USDOT is now running. We have an incredibly good project that we think is going to fare very well in that, in the 75th Street Corridor Improvement Program, where we have significant conflicts between freight rail, Metra, Amtrak, and our highway system. This is honestly maybe the biggest pinch point for freight and passenger rail in the country. This is not a Chicago problem. This is not an Illinois problem. This is a national problem, and we think this program is the way to fund that. And we are, at this point, asking for less than a third of the money to come from the federal government. We're going to raise money locally. We're going to raise money through the railroads. This is, I think, when they talk about targeting federal resources and leveraging other money, we think this is what the federal government's talking about, and we think we have a great chance to make that work. But there's also smaller opportunities. We tend to look at the big picture of public-private partnerships, and we don't think about what are truly public-private partnerships in other places. If you look at some of our Rails to Trails program, the 606, the Prairie Path, these are incredibly successful programs that we have delivered, and the city has delivered, and this region has delivered, that were in combination with an owner of a private railroad. These are the things that we have to continue to look at, is how do we leverage not only cash, but the private resources that can come in other ways. And I think we have many more opportunities than just tolling the expressway system. I think there are ways to do this that are going to move projects along that you and I care about much quicker and in a much better way. The second piece of this is we're talking about hard infrastructure versus soft infrastructure. And I will tell you that the line to me is incredibly blurred. I don't think that there is necessarily such a thing as a definition between hard infrastructure and soft infrastructure. Rails to Trails is another. It's just a great opportunity to think about how do we use existing infrastructure? How do we reuse existing infrastructure in ways that impact communities and make the social fabric of our communities better? From the High Line in New York to the Rail Park in Philly to the Prairie Path, the 606, the Paseo, the Englewood line here in Chicago area, these are incredible successes that we have already started to take for granted. They're not easy to do. They take a lot of work. But I would ask, are these transportation corridors? Are they recreation corridors? Are they opportunities for educational programs? Are they opportunities for public art? And the answer to all of those is yes. We have to think about this in that way. We often think about the soft infrastructure as being about community development and hard infrastructure being about economic development. I don't think that's true at all. I think that transportation and other infrastructure is about the soft side. It is about the social fabric of our communities. It is about that community development. And honestly, what we used to think of as soft infrastructure drives local economies. It gives economies a chance to grow in ways that we hadn't thought about before. Look at the Riverwalk here in Chicago. I walk that just about every day home. So for me, it's a transportation corridor. But there is so much going on there, so much good and positive that's happening from the retail and social side to the recreational side to just using the river in a different way that we hadn't thought about for years. It was an untapped resource, and look at the gem that it's become. So how do we as transportation professionals think about this? We've gone from ignoring the soft side, which we did for a long, long time, to right now, I think our attitude is we need to accommodate. We need to accommodate transit. We need to accommodate bikes and pedestrians. We need to accommodate community development. And for transportation professionals, honestly, that was a big step. But that's not the right step. It's not about accommodation. It's about incorporation. How do we incorporate this from beginning to end in how we are thinking about a transportation and what its role is? For those of you that have known me for a while, you've heard this before, transportation is only about two things. It's about how we strengthen our communities, and it's how we grow our economies. That's all it's about. People don't care whether we are adding a lane, extending a transit line. In and of itself, it has no value. It's what value does it bring to our local communities? What value does it bring to our local economies? How do we use transportation in those ways? And that's something, since we've gotten here at IDOT, that we've really tried to do. So where does that end? Where does that soft and hard end? I don't think it does, and I don't think it should. I really think that we have to look to bring more opportunities into how we look at transportation investment as a way to do more than just getting cars, trucks, and buses from here to there. It is about connecting communities. It is about getting access. There are two huge examples that I want to talk about quickly because I'm going to get the cutoff sign that really give us an opportunity to think differently and do things differently. One is the Eisenhower Expressway that I mentioned earlier that Bob Schillerstrom had to sit on. When we built that 50 years ago, we separated communities. We drove communities apart, and we have an opportunity in the rebuild of that to fix it. How do we provide not just accommodation, but how do we incorporate transit into our thinking as we rebuild the Eisenhower? How does that access to transit work better? How do we think about reconnecting communities by using plazas on our overpasses, by allowing opportunities for parks and retail and other things that connect communities across the Eisenhower to do it in a way that is attractive, that isn't just a bridge that people want to walk out, but is actually a draw in and of itself. We have an opportunity to rethink the way that we do this, and I tell our staff, this is our chance to be a truly 21st century expressway, and we cannot let this opportunity go away. The second is Lakeshore Drive. I think that traditional engineers, if you would ask them, would rebuild Lakeshore Drive just as it is today. That can't be what we do. How do we think about just the entire corridor that is the lakefront? How do we think about the bicycle and pedestrian activity that goes on? How do we think about connecting the parks? How do we think about moving people in a different way on Lakeshore Drive? All of these things have to be a consideration. Our team, when we started talking with the City of Chicago and our other partners about what we were going to do, they narrowed the options too far, in my opinion, and they said, these other options are too expensive. My answer was, we don't have the money that it takes today to do this. We have to think bigger. We have to think about an ultimate solution that is going to take this jewel of a lakefront and make it work for everybody, not just transportation commuters and people that are using it for transportation purposes. We've got to make it work for everybody. And I think a month or so ago, you saw some drawings that came out in the newspapers that showed a new way of thinking about what we're trying to do with Lakeshore Drive and other projects. Transportation agencies have to change. We have to think differently about what we're about. I have spent 2.5 years talking a lot about how we plan for the past. We plan for yesterday. Yesterday's transportation system is not tomorrow's transportation system. The goals of yesterday's transportation system are not the goals of tomorrow's transportation system. I heard the technology question. It's going to change the world in ways that we haven't even always thought about. We have to start thinking differently. We have to be more creative, from everything from funding to project delivery. We have to have broader participation in the way we do business. We have to talk to people more about what it means to them, what it means to their community, what it means for their quality of life, what it means for the social fabric of where we are today. That's what transportation needs to be doing, not just moving people and goods from here to there. Illinois was the most innovative DOT in the country at one time. We are on our way to getting there again, but change is hard. I tell people, my assistant secretary says it best. He says, the easiest thing for a bureaucrat to say is no. You never get in trouble saying no. We've got to find ways to get to yes. We've got to find ways to rethink what we are all about, what tomorrow's transportation system is, what we're trying to accomplish, and where we're trying to go. I'll close with a conversation that I had with a former secretary when I was at IDOT the first time, and I said, transportation is not a goal. Transportation is a strategy. It's a strategy for other social, economic, and community goals, and we've got to stop thinking about it like that. And he stopped the car and asked me to get out. But truly, that is where we have to be. Transportation in and of itself is not a goal. It's a strategy to the bigger picture things that we are all trying to do to make this city, to make this region, to make this state great. And I look forward to continuing to try to move IDOT forward. So thank you very much, and I guess I have time for a couple of questions. Thank you.